we're meeting here at 3:45 in the morning to head to Lima with a group of 20 of us, and so be praying for that effort. But it's going to be a long day, and it's the longest I've been away from my house, 15 days, longest I've been away from work. And I don't know how that's going to go. But eventually you just got to walk away from it, right? Say, hey, good luck. So that's what I'm doing. But anyway, so I've done all I can. But so as far as jumping in, I wasn't going to try to jump into a whole new topic that would take multiple weeks, because I knew that I was going to be here this week and then there was going to be a 2-week break because of Peru. So I know Clay is going to take care of the class next week, and then I'm not 100% sure who's going to do it the week after that, but I think Tony Willis is going to find somebody for that. So, so 2 weeks break. I wasn't going to start something that I would just have to continue when I got back. So I just, with that two things in mind, I just thought I want to look at some passages that I personally have been just interested in and digging into. And they're interesting to me because I've learned a lot from them, and so maybe they'll be helpful to you as well. So look at Matthew chapter 5, if you will, a passage, probably a chapter you've read maybe once. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, this is, somebody goes to Matthew chapter 5, you're like, what new are we going to get out of this, Because we've studied the Sermon on the Mount over and over. But Jesus taught much that was difficult. And I even thought about, and we could do that if we want to, talk about some of the most difficult passages from Jesus, some of the most difficult things that he said. Some of the things that we have the hardest time with. And a secondary discussion, a good one, and I almost thought about going down this path, would be the difficult statements of Jesus and which ones we actually follow and which ones we don't. Because if we actually went through some of the difficult statements of Jesus, we would see that there's quite a few of them that we don't do. Or at least that we adjust. And then there's some of them that we're like, no, you got to do it exactly the way he says it. I mean, it's like a law. He means it. When Jesus said do it, we got to do it. And then there's other ones that we're like, well, he doesn't mean we got to do it exactly like that. Like if your hand offends you, cut it off, Or if your eye offends you, pluck it out. Well, he doesn't really mean to do that, Or Jesus says fast or whatever. He doesn't really mean that we have to do that or wash each other's feet. He's not talking about us. But then there are other statements of Jesus, hate your father and mother. And we're always like, well, he actually means this. He said that, but but then there's other things that Jesus said that are difficult that we're like, no, he means that. Do that. And we could have a really good discussion about what the difference in those are, Like, why is it that sometimes Jesus says something that can be considered very difficult? Even his disciples would say, I don't know if we can do that, like on marriage or on forgiveness. And we say, no, you got to do it exactly like that. That's a law. And then there's other things, like I mentioned, where we're like, he doesn't really mean do that. Or like the Good Samaritan, he doesn't really mean that we have to do all that for somebody. He's just saying help people, stuff like that, And we could have a really good discussion about that, because it might come down to, well, pretty much the ones we think he means we have to do are the ones that we do. That's convenient, right? The ones that he means we have to do are the ones I'm doing. So he means we got to do those. And then the ones I'm not doing, well, he don't really mean we got to do those. It could come down to that. But either way, there are many of those. So I want to look at a couple in Matthew chapter 5, because the Sermon on the Mount starts right here with some big statements of Jesus. The Bible Project is one of those things I love, listening to their podcasts, watching their videos, and some of the things that they say. If you've never listened or watched the Bible Project, it's a technologically savvy, driven way to teach some Bible lessons. And they're going through the Sermon on the Mount right now. So I'm following that podcast. So it's definitely something that's on my mind. And as they say things, I'll study other sources to see what they say and kind of dig in. And so I want to jump into some of these because that's what's on my mind right now, is because I'm following them and they're going through the Sermon on the Mount. And particularly what I wanted to kind of cover, because it's something that they brought out some points, and as I was studying from other sources, it brought out even more, and it was just stuff I had never heard, and I really thought it was helpful to me. So maybe it'll be helpful to you. And we're going to start here in Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to go to verse 38, because this is one of those commands that Jesus states that I think sometimes we put an asterisk beside it and say, well, he doesn't, what does he really mean by this? And it can be misused. These passages can, and be harmful sometimes, if not taken contextually. So let's try to do that. Matthew chapter 5, if you're hopefully there, verse 38, I'm going to read it and then let's go back and do some talking about it. Okay, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. Whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn him away. So, if we're taking this literal modern day illustration wise, this can lead to some difficulty for us. So I want to kind of spend some time looking at maybe what this is and is not teaching. And I'd love to hear some of your experiences and thoughts on this as well. I want to go back a little bit just to contextually throw where Jesus is at in this sermon. He's talking to the multitudes, verse 1. Okay? So he's got all these people in front of him. You've got the sick, the poor, the lame, the Pharisees. You've got a variety of people that he's addressing. And as he starts his discussion here, he starts the Sermon on the Mount. He's basically opening up the kingdom to a group of people who were castaways. And Jesus is basically giving them purpose and meaning in their life by saying, hey, the kingdom is starting with you guys. The ones who most people don't think are worthless, they don't care much about. This is for you. And so a lot of his teaching in this sermon is to address the way people are mistreated. And Jesus is trying to change that narrative. He doesn't, because think about it. If one person is mistreating another, in Jesus' eyes, you've got one child of God mistreating another child. I mean, God created all those people. So the ones who are doing the mistreating, God also loves and cares about just as much. I remember a friend of mine, we were talking, this has been years ago. He has 2 sons. And one of the boys struggled with drug addictions. He had to go to drug rehab and was suicidal. I mean, just, he's doing much better now. But he still has those demons that he's constantly battling. This guy's a friend of mine. He's a preacher. His oldest son. And then his younger son is now a preacher and has just been straight down the line. I mean, wouldn't touch a drink of alcohol, has, just been a model child. Which of those 2 boys does my friend love the most? What do you think? What do you think? I've been talking way too much. Which of those 2 boys, the older one who's been a drug addict and struggled with suicidal ideations, he's stolen money from his family, he's struggled with things a lot, is doing better currently, but they're always having to just be patient with him through these struggles. And the younger son is a gospel preacher, went to Memphis School of Preaching, and is just like preaching at a prominent congregation right now, and is just leading God's people. Which of those two does my friend love more? Neither of them, right? Why is that, Felicia? That's exactly right, right? As a matter of fact, the older boy, my friend, and we've talked about this, and he has made this statement to me. He said, the older son, he said, I have to get dirtier, and I have to work harder, and I have to go places that I don't want to go, and I have to have conversations that I prefer not to have. But there's nowhere that he wouldn't go to bring that son back, and there's nothing that he wouldn't go through. So I want to remember that when we're talking about these two, because I think a lot of times we focus so much on the one who is being taken advantage of, and Jesus does put a lot of focus on that person, the one who is being sued, the one who has been hit. But I also want to remember that God loves the other one just as much, the one who's doing the hitting and the one who's doing the suing. And they're his. And so we look at him as enemy and oppressor. And God looks at him as just the other child. And he wants, so here's what he wants, is he wants even the one who's being oppressed to respond in a way that the other one will also grow closer to the Father. So some of these responses, and we're going to look culturally, hopefully this is some stuff that I've learned, and I hope that it brings this into a little better perspective, because what God is not saying here is that you just let people whip you and beat you up. Because sometimes we teach that kind of stuff. I am a very passive individual. I've said that before. Philip knows I've talked about this. I don't own a gun. I struggle with that kind of stuff. My dad has tried to give me this heirloom shotgun that's been passed down in my family many times, and I just don't want it. I don't want any guns in my house. I'm just that kind of guy. And I know that we got people who are totally opposite of that. So passages like this can be difficult for me too, because it's like for somebody who is very much nonviolent, it's like turn the other cheek. Do I just let somebody just smack me around? Is that what God's saying? Has somebody hit you, just give it, let them. Just keep on turning. If somebody tries to take your cloak, just hand them your other stuff. And if they just keep giving them until they stop taking, until they stop hitting. Is that what Jesus is saying? No. So let's look a little bit at what he is saying. And hopefully we'll get something a little deeper from this. But also, as I say, remember that God wants the oppressed, the person who is being taken advantage of or hurt, to respond in a way, hopefully, that the one who is doing the hurting or doing the oppressing will also be moved to turn to God. So, Matthew chapter 5, let's go back to verse 38. It says, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So, Jesus is basically giving a reminder of a law that they would have been familiar with back in Exodus chapter 21, Leviticus 24, my handy study Bible I hear from AP has all these verses listed. Exodus 21:24, Leviticus 24:20, Deuteronomy 19:21. If you're wanting to see what verses he's referring to when it talks about an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth, you can turn to those passages. Old Testament scriptures that were put into place by God for his people, not to say, here's how you can get back at somebody who's done something wrong to you, but to minimize what was being done. My understanding is that when Jesus said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, he said that because society-wise, in the world at that time, if somebody knocked out somebody's tooth, the other person might just kill them for that. They might say, pull out a gun. Of course, back then they didn't have guns, but but you get what I'm saying. Instead of just responding in kind or in like, giving an equal punishment as we would think, and this is oftentimes the way that we take this. Basically, God was saying, no, let's allow the punishment to be equal to the crime. So he was limiting what they could do. So instead of a life for a tooth, he was saying a tooth for a tooth. Instead of a life for an eye, instead of when somebody plucks out my kid's eye, I'm not going to go kill their whole family. God would say, what you can do, if you feel like you have to do something, now that doesn't mean you have to take out an eye. Because people, as we understand, and Jesus is addressing some of these people, would take it literally. Like somebody knocked out their kid's eye, they'd be like, well, I don't really want to, but I mean, the Bible says I got to take out one of their kids' eyes. So, bring me a hot, stick and let's do this, No, you didn't have to do that. But if justice needed to be served in some way and punishment needed to be brought on this individual who had done something wrong, the punishment needed to be equal. And so that's the basis for what Jesus starts. But look at what he says here, because this is where he kind of goes further with it, okay? And this is where I want to really get into a discussion. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. And sometimes when we read that, we think, well, does that mean we can't stand up for ourselves? No. And the examples Jesus is about to give, he's going to give 3 examples, and they're going to show us that that is not what Jesus is saying. He's not saying that if somebody's hurting you, you can't stand up for yourself. We must, the actual word resist, my understanding is from studying, I'm not a Greek scholar, y'all know that. I don't have to say it for you to know it. You know that by me. You've heard me enough to know I'm not a Greek scholar. But from my understanding, from the word there that's being used, it's do not resist, do not respond in kind. The response should be different. Now, here's what. Look, continue, 39. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. Now, what do you think that means? Because I know it's been used a lot of ways to say, well, we just got to kind of, somebody smacks us on the cheek, we got to kind of turn the other one and just say, hey, instead of hitting them back, we need to give them our other cheek to hit too. Do you have any other ideas on what he might be saying there, or is that what you think he's saying? Any thoughts on that verse, on that statement? I didn't, because like I said, I'm been lazy this week on this, but I didn't pull out the references. But trust me when I say this, you can find these. Josephus, who was an early historian during the time, shortly after the time of Jesus, and other early Jewish writers have written about this idea of the slap on the right cheek. As a matter of fact, it had a great significance at that time. If you slap somebody on the right cheek, okay, let's think of a couple things. Number one, if you're slapping somebody, what are you doing? Yeah, you're angry. Okay? You're showing them you're angry. Are you trying to hurt that person? Like physically? If you slap somebody? Chris, if you're going to hurt somebody, are you going to slap them? Yeah, you're going to punch them. You're going to get a stick and knock them upside the head. If you really want to hurt somebody, like if the point of why you're hitting this person is to hurt them, to take them out, to knock them out, to debilitate them in some way, you're not slapping them. A slap throughout history, you can read historical records even back from before Jesus' time, and a slap was meant to be shameful. Like it was meant to make a statement. Disrespect of a person when you slap somebody. There's a couple of things that I always think of that I've seen a few times in my life in person that when I see it, I'm like, man, that is disrespectful. When I'm spitting in somebody's face. I've seen that a couple of times where somebody just got in an argument and spit in somebody's face. And I'm like, You're not hurting somebody physically spitting in their face. You're trying to show them that you literally don't respect them. You respect them so little that you're willing to just spit on them. Well, a slap is very similar. You're making a statement to that person and anybody around them that this person I think much less of. And I'm going to show everybody that. Okay? And specifically in these times, if you read these Jewish historians back in these days, a slap on the right cheek, if you think about it, what would a slap on the right cheek have been with? How would you do that? I'm not going to demonstrate it, Braden. We'll get up here and I'll slap you on the right. I'm not going to do that. We can envision it, although that'd be fun. But I'm not going to do it to you, Braden. If I slap Braden on the right cheek, I'm right-handed, which most people are. That's why this illustration works. What am I doing? I'm backhand slapping him, right? Just smack. It's definitely not meant to knock somebody out or hurt somebody. It's meant to make a statement about that person, about what I think about that person. So contextually here, automatically, we're not talking about a situation where somebody's trying to hurt you physically. What Jesus is not saying is, if somebody is physically trying to hurt you, you just got to turn the cheek and let them. That's not at all what Jesus is saying. If he was saying that, then he would have used a different illustration with some fist or some, sticks or something. Something that would do some serious damage and knock people out. He's using an illustration that would have been very well known at that time, slapping somebody on the right cheek. It was strictly meant not to be painful, but meant to be disrespectful. Basically meant to say, I think I'm better than you. And also from history and from the writings of these individuals, we know that an opposite slap, a slap on the left cheek, said the opposite of that. Basically, it said, no, we're equals. So if you, at this time, slap somebody on the left cheek, you were basically telling everybody that you were around that you thought that person was beneath you. And what Jesus is telling the Christian to do is that if you're talking with somebody, if you're in a meeting with somebody, a conversation with somebody, and they backhand you on the right cheek, muster up the wisdom, the humility, but yet the courage to turn the other cheek and say, if you're going to do it, slap me on the left cheek. If you're going to slap me as equals. Okay? So, if in the past, if you have read this passage of Scripture or maybe struggled with this because you're like, I'm not, if somebody comes up and smacks me in the face, I'm not going to just turn the other cheek and let them smack me. Somebody comes up and punches me, if somebody comes up and, tries to hurt me or my family, is Jesus saying that I should just let them run over us and let them hurt it? No. No, that's not what this verse is teaching at all. We're going to go on to verse 40, but I wonder if anybody has any thoughts or comments about that one. You ever thought about that before? Anybody want to add anything? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Heaps of coals on their head, yeah. Yeah. Um, I used to love, I was a big Chicago Bulls fan, and I loved Dennis Rodman. I hated him when he was against the Bulls. It's the worst. But when he became a member of the Bulls, I was a big fan. And we went to me and Scott, Scott, you remember this? We went to a Atlanta Hawks game, and him and Bill Laimbeer this was when wasn't it Laimbeer? No, it was Christian Laettner. Him and Christian Laettner were running down the court. Bill Laimbeer, what am I talking about? He was Bulls. Christian Laettner. Anybody knows who Christian Laettner is? There's a Netflix documentary about him. Everybody hates Christian. That guy was was hated. But Dennis Rodman would and he did this with Karl Malone. I mean, he just was the master at this. His goal was just to get you to fight him. He would just do little things like just tripping up their legs and stuff like that, just to get somebody else to retaliate. Because guess what? They were always the one that got kicked out. He'd just irritate and do little things and do stuff just in hopes to get them to mess up. Basically, Jesus is saying, stand up for yourself. He's not saying back down and let people run over you. He's saying stand up for yourself, but stand up for yourself in a way that people will have to respect you. Because obviously, if that person is slapping you on the right cheek, they think you are less than them. You're not as good as they are. You're not equal to them. And you tell them, I am. Now, not in a physical way. You're not hurting them. You're just turning the cheek and saying, hey, right here. We're going to see these other examples do the same. I think of more of a modern day example. Well, I was trying to think of some modern day examples. I have an idea. Emily has begged me not to do this, so I won't. But anybody who knows me knows that I have some pet peeves. And one of them is people yelling at the referees. I used to yell at the referees. I mean, I was like brutal until I became a referee. It's like that, People always say you'll treat, your fast food workers nice if you've worked in fast food. Well, the same's for referees. You don't yell at referees when you've been one because it's a tough job. And I want to do a YouTube channel, a TikTok page, Instagram called Ref Revenge, where I go to schools and I watch the fans. It's going to start with Mars Hill. And I'm going to find the fans that just brutally yell at the refs. They're just awful. I mean, I said a prayer last time they asked me to pray at Mars Hill before a game. Haven't been asked since. But I said a prayer in which I basically just prayed and said, Lord, help us to treat each other and the referees in a way that after this game we can talk to them about Jesus. It drives me crazy when people yell at the referees like they do. Like, we would not yell at anybody else in their position. Like, could you imagine right now, Philip, if you were just like, you're the worst. Come on, move on. We've heard that story before, just while I'm trying to speak. Could you imagine tonight when Ty's up there? Let's do that. Just to get what I want to do is I want to start a page called Ref Revenge, where I watch the crowd and I pick out the ones and I find out where they work, and then I have referees' uniforms from where I was a ref, and I go to their jobs and get somebody to video me. And that's what I do. I yell at them. If they're a doctor, I'm like in the office, like, come on, we've been waiting in the waiting room all day. Come on, our time's not valuable. Just yelling at them. Like if they're, a teller at the bank, just standing in there yelling at them with the referee's uniform on and post on YouTube. It's going to get some views. But my wife's like, please don't do that. So I'm not. But if anybody watches this and gets that idea, I want some of the royalties from all the views. My idea. But when I was a referee, some of you have heard me tell this story. When I was a referee, I was also a preacher in Gadsden, and I refereed some on the side to help pay my bills, because preachers don't make that much money. And so anyway, I was refereeing on the side, and oh man, it was rough. And I refereed this one game, and then I had a break. It was like the JV boys game, and then I had a break during the girls game, and then I ref the varsity boys. And so the JV boys game, there was like 20 people, all parents. And this one lady was just on me the whole game, 4 eyes, because I'm with glasses, You need my glasses, yours obviously. I mean, you could hear because, it's better when there's a lot of people in the stand, so it's just roars. If there's 20, you can hear everything that one person's saying. So anyway, the whole game I could hear. So during the girls' game, I just sat by her. I just went over there and sat by her and just talked to her. I was like, hey, and she's like, and I was telling her I was the preacher at the church just down the street. And she, I thought about visiting there, And the next game, she was like, good call, preacher. Literally the opposite of that, The ref revenge would be what we think this is saying. you know. The other is a way to stand up for yourself, but do it in a, hey, you know, I'm human too. Just because I'm wearing a striped shirt doesn't mean I'm not a person. So let's treat each other with respect like humans would and like we want to. I was in a Taco Bell line one time. Just got in line, had little kids, you know, so we pull in line. And of course, you know, at Taco Bell, I'm like, just quickly, like, what are we going to eat? Whatever it is going to tear our stomach up. This is a terrible decision. You know, we start with that conversation. And I mean, we hadn't been in line long at all. And this guy was just wailing on his horn behind us, which I've never had happen before or since. Just started honking at us. And so I just like, I mean, it, you know, flew all over me. I was like, what is going on? You know? So I just put in park and grabbed a business card because I was the preacher at the church. And I got out, and Emily's like, grab my arm. She's like, do not get out. You know, I'm like, I got to go talk to this guy. And so I got out, and I just walked back there, and I was like, hey, man, you know, I just want to let you know I'm the preacher right down here at the street. You know, we'd love to have your church. He's like, oh, yeah, I live right by, you know. Jesus is not saying if somebody smacks you, you just got to take it, you know. You know, here, just keep on smacking me until you're just tired of smacking, you know. Next one, verse 40. What about that one? If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. So now the tunic and the cloak. Okay, now remember, we're living in a very different time today. So it's hard for us to even look at these verses and relate to them, because it's like if somebody sues me and wants one of my coats, I'd like, okay, I got several coats, I can go buy another coat. I'll give you my coat. It's old anyway. I'll get a new one, whatever. You know, it's not that big of a deal for us if somebody wanted to sue us and take our coat or our shirt or whatever. But you're talking about a time when people typically, especially the audience Jesus was focusing on, would have had probably one of each. Okay? The tunic was the inner garment. And I'm going to tell you the difference here in just a minute. We're going to go to another verse and look at it. They would wear two garments. They would wear the outer garment, the cloak, which would have been their like coat. It would have been made out of like thick animal skin, animal hair, and it would have been itchy, not comfortable, but for warmth. The tunic would have been the inner shirt that would have kept that itchy, heavy outer garment from touching the skin and scratching you, so it would have made it comfortable yet warm. So you had these two. And most people at this time basically just had the one of each. Most people didn't have 2 or 3, 4, 5, 10 pairs of these things. If there was the occasional wealthy person might have had extra outfits, but we're not talking about a time and a group of people where they would have had multiple of these. Most likely they would have had one. Look at Exodus chapter 22. I want to give you a rule. As a matter of fact, this was a common thing for individuals to take somebody's outer garment as a token of payment. And I'm looking here at verse 25. Exodus 22 is, I read all, I was focusing really on this part of Exodus 22. But I always, when I'm studying specific verses, I try to read all of it around it because, you know, I want to get a lot of the context. It'd be like jumping into Harry Potter and just reading, you know, one line of Harry Potter, one paragraph, and thinking you're going to know what's going on. You got to, you know, read around that. So I started reading around it, man. Exodus 22 is full of some stuff. I mean, it's got some laws, and I mean, it's just a lot of stuff. We're not going to do that because I don't know how much it would be useful to us. But the point, look at this. I mean, when you start talking about whoever, you know, verse 19, whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death. Sorcerers won't permit a sorceress to live. I mean, you're talking about all kind of, I mean, it's all over the place on these rules. But they had so many. There was over 600 laws. I mean, the 10 Commandments were 10, but they had a lot of other laws that they had to follow. I don't know if you're familiar with, I've mentioned this book to you before, but I'm going to mention it again because it's a good one and I'd recommend it. It's A Year of Living Biblically. It's, I got to hurry, by J.J. Jacobs or A.J. Jacobs. Has anybody else read that? Say, yeah, I'm not looking up. Has anybody else read A Year of Living Biblically? Okay. I gotta get A.J. Jacobs. This guy who basically is a human guinea pig, and he read, I've told you about it before. He was sitting there, and he was a New York Times author, and he decided he was going to write a book. He was sitting in his grandparents' house, and they had the Encyclopedia Britannica, and he's like, I wonder if anybody's ever read this whole thing, back in the day when you had that on the shelf. Like, volumes and volumes of volumes. I mean, it just took up a whole bookcase. He said, I wonder if anybody's ever read it front to back. And so he read from A to Z, the Encyclopedia Britannica, and he wrote a book about it, Know It All, one man's quest to become the smartest man on earth by reading it. And it's just a funny way. He talks about his journey through it. Anyway, after that, he decided, what am I going to do next? I've read the Encyclopedia Britannica. Well, he was at his grandmother's house. She had this old Bible, one of those big old Bibles with the colored Jesus painting on the front. And he's like, he wasn't a religious person. He's like, I wonder, if anybody follows all that. And so he spent a year of living, but he spent a year trying to follow the Bible as closely as he possibly could. And he spent 3/4 of the year following the Old Testament because it's longer, and then a fourth following the New Testament. He's trying to obey every law, and he's like, it's exhausting. I mean, he talks about the process of listing the laws. Everything he did was just like he said, I was constantly thinking about laws. Everything I did, I felt like I was breaking a law. It's like, it was always on my mind, which had to be the case. But look at this one. This one pertains to what we're talking about. It is in about verse 25. If you lend money to any of my people who are poor among you, we're talking about the poor, they ain't got much. You shall not be like money lender to them. You shall not charge him interest. If you ever take your neighbor's garment, and I've got in the ESV, that's the New King James. The ESV says, you shall not take your neighbor's cloak in a pledge. You shall return, if you ever take his cloak in a pledge. So he's saying, if you ever, to get back from money from this very poor person, and they don't actually have the money on them at the time. They say, well, I ain't got the money. Well, okay, give me something till you get me the money. Well, what do you give him? He ain't got nothing. He's poor. Literally, all he's got is his cloak and his tunic, his outer coat and his inner garment. And so he says, if you take that neighbor's cloak in a pledge, if he says, okay, here, you can take my jacket, my outer garment, and I'll hold on to it till I get back with the money. He says, look at the rule. It's so specific here. He says, if you take that as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. You cannot hold on to his cloak when it gets dark. Why? Because it'd be cold then. He needs his outer coat. Okay, he'd be freezing. So even that rule says, if you take his cloak, the one cloak, he obviously didn't have a second one or he would have put it on. They literally only had one of each of these things. He said, if you take it as a pledge, you got to make sure you give it back to him before the sun goes down because he's going to need it. For that is the only covering. It's the cloak for his body, verse 27. And what else shall he sleep? He's going to be freezing. And if he cries to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate. Am I gone too long? Oh, Emily, that's like she's trying to tell me. Okay, let me make this quick. So basically, because of that rule, because they couldn't hold on to the cloak even for one whole day, they had to give it back at night. He's saying some people were low enough that they would take the tunic. Since I can't have your cloak during the night, let me have your underwear, your inner garment. That's basically what Jesus is saying is requested right here. He says, if anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, this would be the inner garment. Here's what you do. You give him your cloak also. You give him the outer garment also. Now, if I gave somebody my underwear and then I gave them my outer garment, what am I then? I'm naked. So Jesus is basically saying, if somebody is that heartless, if somebody is that selfish that they're not going to break the law. See how strict they were on the law? They're like, well, the law won't let me take the outer garment because I'd have to give it back to him tonight. And I'm not giving it back to him. I'm suing him. I'm taking it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take his inner garment, the only thing I can take that he's got. And Jesus says, if you're literally that selfish that you would take his inner garment, here's what you do. To shame him, So, because you're going to make a scene if you take all that off and you're standing there naked. And people are going to be like, what is going on? Why is this? This guy took my underwear, so I just gave him my outer garment too. See, it's not let people just take advantage of you. It's stand up for yourself in a way that it puts that other person to shame. Backhanded slap, turn the other cheek. Say, if you at least show that I'm equal to you. I'm not less than you. Let me have your tunic. Well, here, come on. If you're gonna make us do this, let's go. And whoever compels you, let's go ahead and hit it real quick. 41, to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. Jesus does not require us to allow others to take advantage of us or beat us down. That's not what he's saying. He's not saying if somebody wants to hurt you, you just got to turn it, let him. No, Jesus is saying stand up for yourself in a way that hopefully, because remember, the other person he loves him too. So he wants us to respond in a way that hopefully that other person will see, what am I doing? What am I doing? And hopefully he'll realize his fault because of the way that we love and the way that we respond. Not in a violent way. Hey, punching them back ain't going to do nothing. Like Caleb said, it's just going to rile everybody up. Responding in a way that hopefully that other brother will also be moved to do better. Okay.